Now, a new poll suggests that Labour is facing the loss of the vast majority of its seats in Scotland to the SNP. The poll conducted for the Conservative peer Lord Ashcroft indicates that in 14 previously safe Labour seats, there has been an average swing of more than 25% to the Scottish Nationalist Party. That would mean the SNP would win all but one of them, even toppling Ed Miliband's general election supremo, Douglas Alexander. Well, the former Labour Prime Minister Gordon Brown is promoting a Commons debate on Scottish representation tonight. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is in the central lobby. Well, now, this poll really suggests that it's very bad news indeed for Labour right across Scotland, doesn't it, Gary?
It certainly does, and it's very interesting what Labour's reaction has been. The conventional politicians answer, oh, we never comment on opinion polls. They're not going near that. They're actually saying this could well be the situation on the ground. They think it's too big, too real to ignore. They're engaging with it. And what seems to have happened in Scotland is that average 45% vote that the Yes campaign got in the independence referendum, that has stayed with the SNP. It included a whole load of voters who'd come over from Labour, and in certain seats, like the ones that were polled, it was more than 45%, whereas the no vote has scattered back into the silos of the other pro-union parties, Labour, Lib Dem and Labour. And it's left Labour in an absolutely horrible position. They hope that they can pull it back and tell the voters that at the moment the voters of Scotland look like they're going to help elect a Tory government, allow one to come in by denying Labour vital seats. At the moment, they're pushing all the buttons they normally do. Gordon Brown speaking there in the chamber, probably his swan song in the Commons, and out campaigning yesterday, telling the voters that vote SNP, get the Tories, but they're whacking those buttons and getting no response. They're not entirely clear what's going on. One theory that's been floated is that it's a bit like bridal magazines. Brides tend to buy them in the year leading up to the happy event, and then they carry on, according to the business model of bridal magazines, carrying on buying that magazine for a year afterwards, because they want to live in that moment when they felt so alive. One SNP source said to me, if Labour are putting around patronising tosh like that, they seriously are in trouble.
Gary Gibbon at Westminster. Well, we're joined now from Glasgow by the man who has the job of trying to turn back the SNP tide, the new Scottish Labour leader, Jim Murphy. Jim Murphy, you're standing on the edge of a precipice.
Well, this is a bad poll for the Scottish Labour Party. It's a bad poll for the Labour Party more generally, and it shows how far we've got to go to travel to close this gap. And I think our argument, as you heard there, is partly that the Scottish Labour Party is under new management. We're a fresh start. We're going to do things differently. We're going to be that sense of radicalism, and we'll make that offer, and that's the main part of what we're saying. But we're also acknowledging that if this poll is borne out by the general election here in Scotland, it increases the chances of David Cameron hanging on to power in Downing Street, and that's the last thing that Scotland and Scots want. Well, but increasingly people realise, increasingly people realise that the biggest party gets the first chance to form the government. This poll would borne out, it would reduce the size of the Labour Party in the House of Commons and give David Cameron the chance of being the biggest party in Parliament, and that would be bad for Scotland.
Well, to use your word, you've been travelling now for 2 months. How far have you travelled?
I think that the Scottish Labour Party wasn't good enough in the recent past. I've said that before, and I say it again, is that in 2007, as your viewers might know, we lost the Scottish Parliament election marginally, and the public tapped us on the shoulder and said we weren't good enough, and we didn't listen. So in 2011, in the Scottish Parliament election, they didn't tap us on the shoulder. They got a big mallet out and hit us over the head with it. And finally, we've started to listen. And these polls will change, I'm confident. There's a fresh start, and we're going through stages where people are beginning to listen to us again, but we haven't yet convinced them to vote for us. That's clear in this poll. We've got a huge amount of work to do. I know that. Right. The conventional wisdom is to come on the telly and say, don't worry, it's all fine. I know we've got some work to do, and if this poll is borne out in May in the general election, David Cameron will be absolutely delighted. Well,
you mentioned the Conservative leader. What about the Labour leader? Does your listening indicate to you should be calling him up to get him by your side? Is he on your election literature? Will he be with you as you campaign across Scotland? Are you looking forward to his presence?
It's a straightforward answer to what is often a tricksy question when people get asked these questions about party leaders through the ages. I'm delighted that Ed will be campaigning with me. He was in Glasgow just a few days ago campaigning. I'm delighted he does so, and what we're talking about is Labour's plan for the mansion tax, a tax across the UK that will help pay and fund the National Health Service here in Scotland. Now, That's a policy that the Tories wouldn't introduce because of its fairness, and it's a policy the SNP couldn't introduce because it's a UK-wide tax. So those
Jim
sorts of
Murphy,
things we'll talk about some more.
Look, I mean, let's be candid with each other. I was there for the
Okay, John,
referendum,
let's
and the
be
referendum.
candid. No one else is listening, John. Let's you and I just have a private chat.
But look, the referendum. For the referendum, he was toxic. So was David Cameron for the other voters in Scotland. You don't want him by your side. Quite clearly, you can't have him by your side. They don't want Westminster politicians messing about in Scotland. This is about Scotland. It's not about Westminster.
This election is about Scotland, yes, but it's also about the governance of the entire UK. And a decision that's taken here in Scotland in terms of these opinion polls wouldn't just inflict a Tory government in Scotland, it would possibly inflict a Tory government across the whole of the UK if the SNP were to do as well as they're doing in this one opinion poll
Right, but a
that
very
Lord
brief
Ashcroft
final
has
question.
done. But pardon, sorry?
A very brief final question. You say vote SNP and you get the Tories, but you could vote SNP and get a coalition with Labour, and that might well be an answer that some of the SNP would like to have, and not vote Labour in Scotland.
Well, the short answer to your direct question, of course, is that we're working hard, but we don't expect, not planning for, don't want, and don't expect to need a coalition with the SNP. We're out to win this election, but we've got a long way to go here in Scotland, and this poll, as I say, if it's borne out, would be a very difficult day for the Scottish Labour Party in the general election, but will be celebrated and toasted by David Cameron, the Conservative Party, and George Osborne.
Jim Murphy.
And Scots don't want that.
Thank you for joining us indeed. I'm sorry we don't have more time. We'll talk to you again very soon. Thank you.